Finally we got to the interesting part. You know, the part that gets you views. The clickbaity part. I don't know if you've noticed in these 2 years of BFA, but if you want to get some attention, you have to shit-talk the game. You have to complain, bitch about everything. That is the current standard MO of your average YouTuber and average streamer. Just shit-talk non-stop. I'm not the type of guy to complain, especially when I see that it's the thing that gets attention. So I'm only complaining now because it's the end of BFA. So I played for 2 years, I haven't really complained that much, so now it's time to get off on complaining about all the things that I'm happy they are not coming in Shadowlands. I'm happy they are dying and they're getting buried with BFA. Right from the get-go, we have to point out the two systems that definitely did not cause as much hurt to the player base as much as they did to the developers. Because these two things were supposed to be the cornerstone of the expansion, the crowning jewel of the new activities pushed into the new expansion. I'm talking about Island Expeditions and Warfronts. Just what the fuck were they thinking? I don't know. They thought they could have made two systems for PvE with basically no gear rewards and that people would have kept playing them. Warfronts were essentially bizarrely available to your faction like once every 2 weeks, and the gear was terrible. They even had to come up with the heroic version just to give you a somewhat more relevant item level as a reward. And Island Expeditions were bizarre. Island Expedition essentially had no loot. They only had cosmetic rewards, which at the start were completely nebulous. You didn't know how exactly were they dropping from which type of mobs. The drop rate was super low. Over time they had to essentially flood Island Expeditions filled with reward. With the crate system and the Seafarer's Doubloon, they just added a couple new ones, Haven's Wood and Jorundel, and the rest was just go in there, farm doubloons, and then just click crates. Warfronts got an even worse end because they were supposed to be like 4 or 5 Warfronts by the end of the expansion. They pushed out the second one and then they just called it a day because they saw that the community was like, what the fuck is this shit? Leave me alone, don't force me in there. So Blizzard gave up. The systems were so bad that they had to completely make up a new one. Essences. Essences weren't even supposed to be in the game. They were like a last-minute addition to Eternal Palace. It was just a key critical mistake, because PvE content, when you look at raids and you look at the Mythic Plus, has gear rewards, right? So you do them for gear. Even in Legion, when you had something like the Artifact Tower challenge, you were getting massive cosmetic rewards, literally changing your artifact weapon. In cases of druids, for example, they were even changing your animal form. But for Island Expeditions, it was just, you know, some random pet, some random toy, maybe a mount. It was just not nearly as close to being impactful as much as a artifact appearance. Not to mention, the tower challenges were doable solo, so you could just take your time, do it on your own, whereas Island Expeditions were a 3-man effort. They were a complete disaster. You know, the community did not like it from the start. They did not change their opinion throughout the expansion. I'm not going to play developer here and pretend to know what they should have done to the Warfronts and the Island Expeditions to make them popular, but they certainly were not. And as I mentioned, to the player base, they were just disappointed and they started ignoring them. But for the developers, it must have hurt because they were counting on these systems quite a bit. And turns out they weren't as popular as they planned. And I'm happy that they're not going to be in Shadowlands in any capacity. I'm happy that they haven't doubled down and said, no, in Shadowlands we're going to make a Warfront version that's going to work, and then just fail again and waste development time in something nobody wanted. So that's a good thing. Now, while Essences got away with it, and I put them in something I will miss, what I will not be missing, surprise, is Corruptions and Azerite. Azerite, I'm sorry, for as much as you have improved in the typical Blizzard fashion of releasing something that works like a 3 out of 10 and then maybe by the end of the expansion starts scraping a 7.5, 8 out of 10, that's not enough. The release of Azerite was embarrassing. The release of Azerite pieces, they couldn't even be traded amongst players even after they enforced personal loot. The community had to rebel to force Eon to say sorry, now you can trade them. Even then they were still shit. They had a pitiful amount of rings for your passives and they were flooded with general non-spec specific passives all over the place. We had to go through several steps. First we had BOD where they removed a lot of these general traits for more class specific traits and they added an extra ring. Then we had to go into Nyalota where they looked into the best-in-slot pieces for all the specs and guaranteed them into the raid pieces, and they kept removing the shittier ones for much better and more tuned spec-specific Azerite traits, and then of course they added the vendor. Still too late, and still not enough. Azerite was way too polarizing for way too much of the expansion. It created way too much frustration. I know you have gone through clearing an entire set of Mythic Zeros without a single Azerite piece, and then nothing from the raids, and you had to wait for your cash from Mythic Plus, hoping that you could get an Azerite piece from there, and then hoping that the Azerite piece was even decent, because as I said, it was filled with random general garbage traits, so you had to even get the good one, and that lasted too long. More so than the state they are at the end of the expansion is something I will not miss, because it's the typical Blizzard path. You know, the typical Blizzard pattern of improving something over the expansion when it could have been improved from the release. There was no need to go through all these steps to improve the way they worked. So when it comes to Azerite, I'm happy they're gone. I'm happy we are gone to classic, old school, boomer pieces of gear with no caveats, nothing. Just your good old piece of gear. And then we have corruptions. I mean, what can we say about corruptions? They completely brutalized gearing for an entire tier. They were an abomination. To my experience, they are the worst piece of gear optimization that I've ever seen in the game. They beat Legendaries by quite a bit. They were so bad, they sort of made you forget that Titan Forging wasn't even a thing in the last tier of BFA, because the Titan Forging was all in the effects of the corruptions. You know, before, a 410 piece could Titan Forge to be 470, and after, a 410 piece could Titan Forge to get Infinite Stars rank 3. Not only this, but both Azerite and corruptions had the habit of essentially taking your spec hostage. Azerite traits essentially becoming necessary for your spec to even work, which is bad because not only does it make you dependent on a borrowed power, but then it's gonna feel even worse when you actually lose it in the next expansion. Just ask Fire Mages, ask Protection Warriors, ask Destruction Warlocks. They were dependent on several Azerite traits, and when they lose them it feels terrible. Same goes for corruptions. It was a terrible system and it wasn't healthy for anyone, really. You know, again, they were too slow to come up with the improvements. They had to nerf things like Echoing Void, they had to nerf things like Twilight Devastation and Infinite Stars, they had to lock the power of the corruption to the item level, so people would stop farming world quests to get their best in slot. They had to add a vendor once again, something they did way too late. Why? Because without vendor, people get pushed to play the game much more, because they are frustrated. So they are betting on people's frustration to sink more hours into the game, which is a bad system because it's not going to make players happy, which is why there can be so much resentment on these type of game systems. Corruptions were a frustrating system that frustrated you and made you play more. The same was for Legendaries. Yes, at the end you had the vendor, but before the vendor you had people freaking out and being frustrated and annoyed that they were trying to farm LFR, normal, heroic and mythic of 1, 2, 3 previous raid tiers just because it increased their bad luck protection against legendary drops. You know, it's a terrible system. Clearly, according to the Activision suits, it's a good system to force higher play rates in the game, which is why this keeps happening. I'm hoping it's not going to happen in Shadowlands. There aren't many systems that are going to force this behavior, honestly, so I'm not as worried. And I'm certainly way less worried knowing that Corruptions and Azerite are not going to be in Shadowlands. Talking about frustrating systems that invade your relationship with your character and make you think that you have to do more to give your character power. They make you think you need to do more grinding for Legendaries, more grinding for Artifact power, more grinding for Azerite power. This is not going to be a thing in Shadowlands. Anima power is completely different, it's capped every week, it's going to take you about an hour every week to get the anima you need, so it's completely a non-issue in Shadowlands, which is why I'm happy it will not follow the same thing we had in BFA, which was Azerite power. Azerite power for, again, roughly half of the expansion was terrible. When it was tied to the rings of your Azerite pieces, yet another very clunky and counterintuitive system of Blizzard where you were taking Azerite pieces and the strongest Azerite traits were in the outer tier, which meant you needed to reach a certain amount of necklace level to be able to use them, and if you were doing mythic raiding, for example, you were having to wait weeks before you could unlock the last piece, depending on how far you grinded. It was a very annoying system. Yes, once again, over time, Blizzard decided to give you all your Azerite trait rings completely unlocked, and Azerite power lost a lot of value. You didn't need to grind it as much as you did before, but it still doesn't change the fact that it was in the expansion for far too long, in far too much of an oppressive state. And once again, similar to the Azerite problem or the corruption problem, this is not going to be a thing in Shadowlands, because from the get-go, your anima power is gated. From the get-go, you won't need to grind it heavily all day, every day. So it's a very welcomed loss, the loss of AP grinding. And now I'm closing, rather than with a goodbye, with a transformation. We are not saying goodbye to the Mythic Plus cache at the end of the week or the PvP cache. We are instead going to look at the transformation of the Great Vault. Instead of a completely RNG piece of frustration you would get at the end of the week, now you're going to be rewarded based on the amount of effort you put throughout the week, raids, PvP or Mythic Plus. The cap on the amount of effort you want to put is also healthy. It's not some sort of, if you spend 20 hours a day farming Mythic Plus, you will get 30 choices at the end of the week. No, it's just 1 for 10 from Mythic Plus. It's clear, basically clear your entire raid if you're raiding, and do some rated content in PvP. The max level that you need to reach all the possible choices for the 3 type of activities is moderate. It's not excessive, and it can give you a lot of rewards, up to 9 every week, from the 1 completed random you had from the Mythic Plus cache and the 1 from PvP in BFA. It is much more healthy. What's more important than the 9 choices is that you can choose between them. It is going to be much easier for you when you have, for example, 3 pieces left for you to upgrade, say 1 trinket, 1 belt, 1 pair of gloves. With this system, it's much easier to have a chance to get what you need. So it's much more healthy, and I'm definitely happy that the old cache systems are gone. And with this last bit, we are done looking at the things I will definitely not miss from BFA. I wonder what you guys are going to be missing, or rather not missing from BFA, what you hated and you're glad it's gone and you won't have to deal with in Shadowlands. I've already pointed out in a previous video, a couple of videos actually, that I do believe the borrowed power systems and the grinding systems in Shadowlands are much better than the previous 2 expansions, which drowned us in RNG and borrowed powers. From my end, I'm pretty positive about this, about the upcoming changes for Shadowlands, but I'm curious to see if I got it all wrong, and there are some things you totally didn't want in Shadowlands that are still gonna be here. So if there are, let me know. In the meantime, the nephews are gone, so now I have to start cooking. See you guys soon.